Hello there, this is the Eclectic Eccentric. Today I'm going to walk you through the process I did making a sheath for my push knife. This is the first of several leatherworking projects that I'm going to do. I'll probably change up the format for those so we don't get a bunch of videos of the same thing. This will be an overall build that I will talk through the process. I'll do it fairly quick. Later, I may focus on certain aspects of leatherworking to help with specific techniques. The video is a little bit longer, and those specific techniques, when I do them, will probably have shorter format video. Okay, first things first, you can see my sheath. It was broken. You can see the leather I'm working with. First, I'm going to make myself a stencil. That is the old broken sheath that I'm doing, and then I'm also doing one for the inside for the knife. Then you cut those out. I cut them out on cardstock. That way they have a little bit more stiffness to them, and you can trace that out onto a piece of leather easier. You can see I left a little bit extra at the top here as well. That's so that it gives me a little bit of guide because I need an extra piece of leather to loop around to make the belt loop. See, I'm tracing that in on the inside of that piece of leather to make sure I have enough gap, because I'm going to be putting an extra piece of leather around the sides so that it doesn't cut through the thread like that webbing sheath did for me, and then it started poking out the side. Here I was measuring to make sure I have enough leather, and then I used a board as a straight edge to both mark my piece of leather and cut it out. I just used a box knife to cut out. I need to get some better leather knives, but right now that's all you really need to start it. And of course I'm marking my piece of leather. What I'm doing now is I'm folding over the stencil to make sure that it's even on both sides and trimming off the side. Now I'm going to mark it out, that way I can cut out my piece of leather. Curves are especially hard when using a straight knife. There is a half moon knife that you can get specifically for leatherworking. I plan on getting one. That gauge I've had for a while. It is extremely nice. It's sharp enough that I can mark leather with it, and it never slips. It always keeps its adjustment correct. I highly suggest getting one. Here I am making sure my template is good. You see I switch back through with the X-Acto knife and the box cutter. The box cutter is really nice for pressing down and getting huge chunks, but you can do the same thing with just a regular X-Acto knife. It just takes more passes. Here I am. I'm making sure that it's going to be enough leather to make the belt loop. And I'm going to make a second cut of that on that thinner leather. The thinner leather is about a 5 or 6 point leather, or 6 ounce, and the thicker leather is about a 10 ounce leather. I get most of my leather from Springfield Leather Supply. They have sent me some really nice leather. Sorry, it's Springfield Leather Company, my bad. The top here to make sure I have a nice straight top. I'm going to use my flat edge, my board again. Once you make a light cut in the top of the leather, it does make a groove, and then it's easier to just follow that straight line again. So once you make that groove, you should be set. Here I'm making the inside kerf there. See, I marked out the outside edge, and then I'm going to use that gauge to make sure I have the same thickness all the way around. I'm saving as much leather as I can, so I'm just cutting it into 2 pieces. That way I don't have to cut the whole U out of a piece of leather. Here I got frustrated with the long piece of leather, and so I cut off a little chunk of it that I needed. That way I didn't keep pulling on one side. Again, that gauge is invaluable. It lets you get nice, even spacing. First, right now what I'm doing is I've now changed that gauge to make a line on all my pieces of leather so that it's a nice even line. And what that does is that will let me make space for a stitch. Now I'm getting ready to stamp my piece of leather. I make that diagonal line because I'm using a basket stamp. And with that diagonal line, what it lets me do is that it lets me keep my basket stamp straight. I should have kept that line straight through both of my pieces of leather so that my basket stamp lined up. I didn't. You'll see that here in a minute. I actually decided to switch the direction my basket stamp is going. That way it looks more natural than me just being slightly off one another. So that is contact cement, which I will use to combine most of my pieces of leather before I sew them. Also, while the leather is drying, I do weight it down a little bit so that it doesn't curve up too much. Here, even though this piece of leather is going to be covered up, I am going to stamp a significant portion downwards. That way, if when the sheath is opened up, you don't see in there and then it's just blank and dull. You can see down into it a little bit. It looks like I've done the entire piece in basket weave. Once you get to the edge of the piece, you don't want the basket to go completely to the edge on where you're going to be sewing. So what you usually do is you just tilt your stamp a little bit and only do 1/2 of it or 3/4 of it accordingly, and you can actually get a nice fade effect going on it. Again, I am an amateur at this, but basket stamping is pretty good with the process, and it's a little forgiving because you can adjust your stamp accordingly. Okay, after the leather dries, now I'm sanding down the smooth side of the leather here so that it roughens it up on those pieces so that the contact cement will adhere properly. I didn't want to get contact cement on my granite tabletop, so I am putting that board down again. With contact cement, you definitely want to apply it to both pieces, and then you have to let it partially dry out before putting the pieces together. Oh yes, I lost a bit of footage, but basically all I did was stain that outside piece of leather and then also get my two pieces glued together. Here I am burnishing that edge. Basically you just put a little beeswax on it, and I have a burnisher on a Dremel tool. I want to burnish those edges right now because when I sew on the front and when I also sew the belt loop, it'll be harder to burnish those after they're sewn. What the burnishing does is it gets all those fibers of the leather to lay down, and then it smooths them out, and the edge will be a lot more durable because of it. That is just a puck of beeswax. I actually got it from Ace Hardware. You can get it from most hardware stores. Woodworkers use it to cover screws so that they go in easier. They also put it on drawers so they slide easier. You can use like cosmetic grade. That's definitely not what this is. Here I am wetting down the piece of leather and flattening it out so that the belt loop is easy. Now I'm cutting a little wedge out of that leather so that it folds over easier as well. You don't want to go too deep, obviously, because you might cut through, but if you just cut a little bit of a wedge, it gives you a lot nicer fold. Here I'm now punching the holes that I will sew through. I got the wedge stuck a little bit. That mat, that green one, is a thicker cutting mat. I use that specifically for punching through. You'll see many marks after I'm done with it because of how much I punch into that mat. Here I'm using a 2-needle variant of stitching. It just really strengthens the stitch for leatherworking. I'm also using waxed thread. And basically you just run both sides of the thread through each hole, and you just get into a rhythm, make sure you don't screw up which needle is which, get into a pattern. For the belt loop I did 2 layers, even though it got pretty difficult to pull through afterwards, because I wanted the extra strength on the belt loop. I thought about doing a rivet instead of the thread, but I wanted the thread because if it does somehow break, with the thread it's easier to repair. You can see the stitching is one of the longer parts of the leatherworking, and see this is just the shorter stitch too. I actually lost some of the footage of the longer stitching, but let me just tell you that that's the single longest part. Oh, and here I am actually polishing the inside because you won't be able to get to polish that later after you sew that on top, or else it'll be a lot harder. Okay, and now I'm sanding down the edge of that inside piece because I'm getting ready to glue those two pieces together. Be careful with the brush on that contact cement. It's usually those brushes are kind of crappy, so you have to be really careful because you don't want to get contact cement on the outside of your piece, or else the dye won't adhere, or it won't soak into it. Also with contact cement, after you let it dry and everything, it solidifies on contact. You have to be very careful because once it touches itself, it will solidify. Here, when I'm punching the holes for sewing, I make sure to do one extra hole right above the front of the sheath. That way the stitches will pull that together. I'm still new to this, trying to figure out the centering on my camera. I might do a video specifically on the stitching later to show the process of it, and then I'll make sure that that video is centered for you. You can also make a jig or get a leather sewing machine. The leather sewing machines can be really expensive. For a automatic one, like your standard sewing machine, it's several $1,000s. But there is a hand-powered cobbler leather sewing machine that I've been interested in. I've seen several YouTube videos about it, and it's only about $200. I might get one of those later on, and who knows, if my channel takes off too much, I might actually get an actual sewing machine. However, that kind of goes against the idea of this channel, because I want this channel to be accessible to a lot of people, and a couple $1,000s for a leather sewing machine is not very accessible. However, a couple $100, I could see people spending that. So I sanded down the edge of my leather pieces, because once you get all three of those layers together, they can get a little uneven. Now I stain that piece and all the edges. It's a really dark stain. So if I take a little paper towel and dab off some of that, it really helps. Then I let that dry for a little bit, and I'm now going to be putting one rivet in the bottom. This will just give that strength to that very point piece where the point of the knife is going to go. That way the knife doesn't poke through there. Now I'm going to put the knife in that. It's still a little wet, but I want to do that with the knife in it. That way the sheath forms to it a little bit. Now I'm going to be polishing up the rest of the piece. You can see I just use a neutral shoe polish. You can use beeswax and a bunch of different things, but I find the neutral shoe polish with just a boar bristle brush and then just a cotton rag. Right there I have a cotton glove that I use. Next I'm applying wax to all the edge there and burnishing it. That puck of beeswax I use for a lot of things. You see I burnish with it. I also apply some to my needles and also some to my puncher that lubricates it so that it goes through the sheath easier, or the leather easier as you're passing through, and you can pull it out easier as well. I have a couple different burnishers. I have that long one that I use for the big flat edges, and then I have my wide one here that has those wide round corners that will round the piece nicely. Next I'm going to finish up with just a wheel to get off a lot of the wax to really polish that up. Then I'll finish off with a cloth rag. Thank you for watching my video. If you liked it, please subscribe, ring that bell icon, like the video if you liked it, comment down below if you have any ideas for more videos in the future. Also, if you have any aspects specific to the leatherworking that you have any questions with, please ask down below. I will try to make a video on those later. Anyways, thank you very much. You have a wonderful day. Bye.